Now that we have learned about the Node MongoDB driver, the Node module, which enables our Node application to be able to interact with a MongoDB server, in this exercise, we will use the Node module and use the various methods that are supported by the Node module to provide interaction with our MongoDB server. To get started, go to the Node.js folder that you have been using to store all your Node examples, and then create a new folder there named Node Mongo. And in this folder, we will develop the Node.js application that interacts with our MongoDB server. Now, make sure that your MongoDB server is up and running. So in the previous exercise, we have already seen how our MongoDB server can be started. So keep the MongoDB server up and running, and in another terminal window or terminal tab or command window, go to the Node Mongo folder that you have just created and initialize a Node application here. So let me type npm init, and we will name the application as Node Mongo, and version, description, Node MongoDB example, and the entry point, and the author, just like we have been filling in the previous exercises. And then once the package.json file is initialized, open this in the editor of your choice. And now going into the package.json file, let me introduce another script here, just like we have been doing earlier. So we'll say start node index and save the changes. Going back to the terminal, let's install the MongoDB node module. So type npm install MongoDB -- save. We'll also install the assert node module. So we'll say npm install assert -- save. The assert module enables us to use the assert to check for truth or false values within our application. And you will see me using it later. Now that we have installed these node modules, let's create our node application that interacts with the MongoDB server. Going back to the editor, in the project folder, create a file named index.js, and this is where we will create the node application that interacts with our MongoDB server. So in this application, let's type const mongo client, and then we'll say require MongoDB, the MongoDB node module that we have already installed, and then this would provide us with the Mongo client that enables us to connect to the MongoDB server. Also, let's require the assert module. Now, to start up a connection to the MongoDB server, let's create a constant named URL, which will be the URL where the MongoDB server can be accessed. And the way we access this is by saying MongoDB : localhost 27017. Recall that this is the port number at which your MongoDB server is running, 27017. Const db name is equal to, and then we'll say confusion. Recall that we created the confusion database in our MongoDB server in the previous exercise. So we're going to access that confusion database that we have created earlier. Now, to access the server, we'll say Mongo client connect. So the connect method allows us to connect to the Mongo client from our MongoDB server. And then we'll say this takes the URL as the first parameter, the URL of the MongoDB server as the first parameter. And the second parameter is a callback function. And so the callback function has two parameters, the error value and client, which we can then use to connect to our database and then perform various operations. So inside this callback function, now first thing that we will do is to check to make sure that the error is not null. So the assert will check to see if error is equal to null. So the assert function allows us to perform various checks on values. So we check to make sure that the error is null. If it is not null, then that means that there is an error, and so we will show the error on the screen. So that's the use of the assert function here. Now, if that doesn't happen, then that means that we have connected properly to the server. So we'll say connected correctly to server. Const db equal to client.db db name to connect to the database. Then we can say const collection db dot. So the db will provide us with various methods that enable us to interact with the server. So we'll say db collection dishes. So we'll try to access the dishes collection within this database. Now, the next thing that we will try to do is collection insert one. So we will try to insert one object into the collection, and this object would be with the name and description test. So this collection provides this method called insert one, which allows us to insert one document into this collection, and the document is the first argument to this method here. The second argument to the method is a callback function, and the callback function takes two parameters, error and result. So within this callback function, if the result is obtained, then we are able to access the collection and then perform further operations. So here, the first thing that we will do is check to make sure that error is not null. So we'll do an assertion there. And then here we can say we'll say after insert so after we insert, then we see that we get the result value that is returned there. So there is a result. This result will also provide this OPS property, which says how many operations have just been carried out successfully. So that is what I'm going to print out. So it will say number inserted is 1, so which means that this particular item has been document has been inserted into the database. So that's what we will confirm here. Then after that, we will perform another operation on the collection. We'll say collection find, and we'll try to search for all the records in the collection. So here we will supply an empty JSON string or correspondingly the JavaScript object. So it will search for everything that is there in the collection and then provide that to us. And then this can be converted to an array of JSON objects. So this is why we call the toArray. And this takes a callback function as the parameter. The first parameter, of course, is the error value. So again, we check to make sure that the error is not null. Then we'll say console log found, and then print out whatever has been found. And we'll say console log. So the second parameter here, docs, will return all the documents from this collection that match whatever criteria that you specify here. Since this is empty, then that means that all the documents in the collection will be returned to us. You can specify a filter here, so saying say name is equal to a value, and then only those documents that match that value will be retrieved. So here, let me just print out the docs here to indicate that this item has been inserted into the collection and then will be retrieved, and then we'll just print it out just to make sure that the document that we just inserted in the previous operation is indeed in the collection, and so we'll print that out here. Now after this, then we will use the drop collection method here. So the drop collection will drop the specified collection here. So we'll say drop collection dishes. So I'm just going to remove the dishes collection from my database. I'm just going to clean up the database and then leave it with an empty database so that we can go on to the next exercise where we can again perform similar kind of operations to check this out. And this one takes as a second parameter a callback function which returns either an error or a result. And inside this, we will check and make sure that the assert is not null. And then we'll say client close. So we will close the connection to the database at this point. So with this simple set of methods enable us to interact with our server, and also it demonstrates to us how we can communicate with the server using the methods that are available through this MongoDB node module or the MongoDB driver. So here you see that first we perform an insert operation. Then after the insert operation, note that we are doing the second operation inside the callback function. So this ensures that this operation has been completed before you do the next one. So this is a second call which is enclosed inside the first callback function. And then correspondingly inside that we are again calling the methods here and inside there. So you see that there is a nesting of these calls one inside the other. Note the structure, because I'm going to come back to explain something about this in one of the later exercises. So note the nesting of these calls one inside the other. Let's save the changes and then see what this application does when we execute it. Going back to the terminal, again, make sure that your MongoDB server is up and running, and so when it is running, it is going to print out a lot of log messages onto the console. We can just ignore those log messages for now. Let's run the node application. So we'll say npm start, and when the node application runs, you notice what this node application is doing. So it says connected correctly to the server. After insert, then it shows that this particular document has been inserted into our MongoDB, and the note in particular, the ID given here. So notice that this doesn't say this as object ID. This ID is automatically inserted by the Node Mongo driver into the document when you try to insert it into the MongoDB server here. And this format is exactly the same as the object ID that we have seen earlier. Thereafter, we performed a find operation. So this says found, and then it prints out this item here. Note that from the previous exercise, we had left over an earlier document that we had inserted in the previous exercise. So that is still seen in the collection here. And the new document that we just inserted here, this document is seen right below that here. But note that these two have two different IDs. This ID matches the ID of the document that we just inserted. So this is left over from the previous exercise. And after this, of course, we drop the collection. So this whole set of documents and the dishes collection will be removed from our database. So now our database will be clean and empty. So that demonstrates to you how we can use the MongoDB driver to communicate from our node application with the server. Now that we have our application, let me introduce a .gitignore here and then put node modules into the .gitignore, and you quickly understand why I am doing this. Then we will go back and initialize the Git repository and then do a git commit. Going back to the terminal, let me initialize the Git repository, and then let's check the Git status, and you see that there are some uncommitted files. So let me check them in and then do a git commit with the message node MongoDB example 1. This is the part 1 of the exercise. So we'll just check the items into our Git repository. This completes this exercise. In this exercise, we have seen how we install the node module, the MongoDB driver. Then we were able to communicate with our MongoDB server from within our node application using the methods that are provided by the MongoDB driver. We will continue with this exercise in the next part of the exercise, where we will explore a few more methods of the MongoDB driver.